Welcome to the Hastings Shadmehry Show with your hosts, Andee Hastings and Mally Shadmehry. Dive into the heart of family law as Andee and Mally bring clarity to legal challenges, celebrate client victories, and share the wisdom of their combined expertise. Get ready for a journey into empowerment and advocacy right here where your story matters.
Welcome to the Hastings Shadmehry Show, where we delve into the heart of family law and the stories that shape our lives. I'm Mally Shadmehry, and joining me is the ever-insightful Andee Hastings. How are you today, Andee?
I am doing great, Mally, but really more importantly, how are you doing?
That's exactly why I asked that question. I'm okay. I'm okay. That's me every day. Am I okay? Yes, we're okay. I am in the middle of a big trial, and it started earlier this week. It goes back next week. And, you know, when you're in the middle of trial mode and you have to be put on pause and go back to work and go back to trial next week, your mind really does not shut off from the case. So I am just dreaming about my case, and, you know, there's exhibits all over my house. It's a very trial Christmas at my house this year. So that's how I'm doing. We are excited. We've got our firm Christmas party this weekend coming up. We're going up to some cabins, taking the whole firm up there. It's going to be really fun.
And I'm excited. I think everybody's really kind of pumped up for it.
Tell our people what our activity is going to be up there.
So we're going to do axe throwing on Saturday, which seemed quite apropos for a law firm full of people who deal with family law, especially in the holidays and what our clients are going through.
Yes, we're going to go get out some aggression, throw some axes.
Hopefully not kill anybody. That would be bad.
Hopefully.
It's not in our plan.
All right. So today we are going to be talking about something that a lot of people that call and consult with us, they want to know right out of the gates. And that is, what is an uncontested divorce? That's what we're talking about today. Uncontested divorce specifically, and what is the process for it? So let's start with that. Andee, what even is an uncontested divorce?
So I think a lot of people are confused. They throw around the term in ways that it doesn't necessarily apply. An uncontested divorce is simply a divorce where every issue has been resolved and settled. So if we have a client that calls and says, I want an uncontested divorce, and we start asking questions, and I'll say, okay, so what is the agreement that y'all have reached? And they'll say, well, we've talked about this or this, but, you know, my spouse wants this and I really want to do that. What they're really saying, I think, is that what they want is a less contentious divorce, but they haven't actually resolved the issues yet. So until it's settled and we have settlement documents, it is contested. I always say it's contested until it's not. Is that your perspective?
Yeah. So what I always tell people, so usually a lot of our clients that call and have consultations will say, I want an uncontested divorce. I want an uncontested divorce. And just like you said, Andee, what they mean by that is I just don't want it to be contentious. I don't want to have to see a courtroom. I just want to get this settled. And I always explain it to them like this. There are two types of divorces, uncontested and contested. And I always say, don't let the term contested scare you, okay? And we're going to cover that in another episode, what is a contested divorce and different options for that. But it shouldn't scare you. You can still settle a contested divorce. Because like you said, Andee, and how I explain it is, an uncontested divorce means you and your ex sat down at the kitchen table and you wrote down an agreement that you both said, yes, I agree to all of these terms, and you resolved all of the terms of your divorce or your custody case all in one. So y'all don't have any other questions. You're ready for a lawyer to simply just write up the agreement. And if you have not agreed on every single term together, then it's technically not uncontested, because you need a lawyer to help hammer out the details and perhaps negotiate a couple things to conclusion, which is totally fine. But uncontested really does mean y'all have agreed on everything, and you simply need a lawyer to draft all the final settlement documents. And Andee, do you have an idea of the type of candidate that's probably best for an uncontested divorce? Is there a certain type of client that does better uncontested versus other types of cases and clients?
I find that they kind of run the gamut, actually. Sometimes when the finances are more straightforward and you've got two people that are working, there's not, alimony issues or discussions that need to be had and that sort of thing. I find that those lend themselves to reaching an uncontested resolution. But one of the things I find that people disagree upon a lot, and sometimes the most, is kids. And so, if we have somebody come in and they have an agreement in principle as to what they want their parenting plan to look like. Say, you have somebody that comes in and they say, we've agreed to do 50-50. That's an agreement in principle, but what we find is that we've got to drill down into that in order to figure out what they really mean. And that's, I think, what you're talking about when you need a lawyer to help you with that. But, people that are generally on the same wavelength about how they approach finances and kids are more likely to successfully have an uncontested divorce. What do you think? What do you see?
I, first of all, always recommend that people talk to a lawyer before they determine whether they are going to have an uncontested divorce or a contested divorce. Because, like Andee, like you said, candidates for uncontested divorces, they do kind of run the gamut. But you want a lawyer to basically, if you want an uncontested divorce, you want a lawyer to sit down with you before you talk to your spouse about it so that they can coach you on how to have that conversation with your spouse. What would look like a fair agreement to you? Because you might sit down at that kitchen table and agree on something that is idiotic for you. And we can help catch that before you do it. So you want to talk to a lawyer first, determine if you're a good candidate for contested versus uncontested, and then go talk to your spouse, work out an agreement, bring it back to the lawyer to just draft it up and get you guys divorced. I typically think that the better candidates for uncontested cases are people that haven't been married as long, 10 years or less usually. No children, definitely, you're a better candidate. But sometimes if you have children and y'all can agree, let's just do a very basic parenting plan. I'll have primary, you have like an every other weekend. Though, if y'all seem to be on the same page and you can agree on those sorts of things, we'll know that early on. And so kids even if you have kids, you can still do an uncontested divorce. But usually it's people that are married for less amount of time. They have accumulated less assets and debts. They're not high earners. They're both probably earning less than $100,000 each. Those are the most straightforward uncontested divorces. And then when you're dealing with business owners in some more complex financial situations, those are where you're probably wasting your time trying to reach an agreement without doing some basic discovery like you would need to do in a contested case. Another thing that I'll just quickly add is that when there's been a lot of abuse going on in the marriage, whether that's mental, financial control abuse, those sorts of issues, and of course physical abuse, all of those things, really those kind of cases are not candidates for uncontested divorces. It's not appropriate for parties to be negotiating together when they've had those kind of issues.
But don't you think that we do see folks who are victims of abuse who come in and they say, they've offered me this, I want to take it, I just want to be done. And it ends up being something that may be horrible for them, but they're seeing the short-term gain of getting away from this person and having their freedom. I tend to think that that's a situation where somebody really needs the support of an attorney because people can make bad agreements all the time for very valid emotional reasons, but they can end up regretting those decisions later, a year down the road, 5 years down the road, that sort of thing.
Definitely that. And just don't sign anything until you run it by a lawyer. That's what I would say.
Absolutely.
Because a good family law attorney would be able to look through, let's say your spouse said, hey, this is what we see a lot. I came up with this agreement. It's perfect. And I'm taking care of you. Here's what we've got. And you should just sign it. You're crazy if you don't sign it. We hear that all the time.
Or the other piece, well, if you go to a lawyer, I'm not going to give you as much as I'm offering you right now. I feel like we hear that all the time.
Oh, at least once a month in a consultation. And it's not to make light of it, because it is very scary when you've been married to the person for a long time and they're promising you these things, and there's some part of you that you still want to trust that surely they're not trying to screw you over. And that's why you have an attorney that will be able to quickly look through and identify problem areas and just make sure that this is fair, or these are some red flags, and typically we'll find red flags. So Andee, could you walk us through the process? Like, let's just say we've done a consultation with somebody and determined, yes, this is an uncontested divorce. Y'all have reached an agreement, and it looks like the terms of this agreement are full, and we can move on from here. What happens after that? What's the process?
So we can only represent one party, first of all. We get this question all the time. Okay, we've reached an agreement. Can you represent us both? The answer to that is no. And that's not that's not my preference. That's dictated by the ethical rules. It is unethical for an attorney to represent both parties in a divorce case. So the party that we've met with, that we've spoken to, we draft the agreement with them. They can give us the information. We draft the agreement. We get the question, I feel like a lot, does my spouse need to go get an attorney too, even though we've reached this agreement? And my response to that is not necessarily, but if they have any questions about the content of the agreement, then they do need to consult an attorney, because I, as your lawyer, cannot answer those questions. And I do not want to blow up your settlement if this is what is good for you and you want to do. So, if they have questions, they may need to go to somebody. We draft the documents, we give it to the other side, whether or not they take it to an attorney. We may go back and forth, we get it finalized. And then when we file it, it is an uncontested case, because we file a complaint for divorce with the settlement documents, and you can take your final divorce no sooner than 31 days thereafter. Is that the process that you want?
Yeah. So sorry. And what that means is that basically, once you retain the lawyer and you've got that uncontested, agreement between you two, the lawyer takes that agreement you two made, puts it into a beautiful legal document. You both approve on a final basis and you sign it. And like Andee said, if you've got questions, if the other side has questions, they can go ask their own lawyer about it. But ultimately, and in the best uncontested situations, everybody's signing off on that agreement that's drafted, because y'all have already agreed to everything. Nothing else to disagree about. It's all in writing. And we usually have people here at our office. They sign off on everything. And in our firm would file everything for the parties, so that you guys wouldn't have to worry about learning how to go file everything with the clerk of court, all the stuff. And as Andee said, in Georgia anyway, once you submit everything to the court has the authority to sign off on the divorce and make it final on day 31 following when we filed everything. The court does not have the authority to finalize a divorce until the case has been pending in the docket in the court system for at least 30 days. Then on day 31, we would be reminding the court, hey, it's day 31. Please sign off on this divorce. We've agreed on everything. And then it's in the judge's hands when they sign off on the divorce. It's usually around that 31-day mark, and you're divorced. You don't have to go into a courtroom. You're just divorced. It's all done on paper, and you guys are starting into your new chapter. So what are the benefits, the pros to doing an uncontested divorce?
Well, I think that the obvious pro is that it's less litigation, which means it's less expensive. And particularly if you do have children or you're going to maintain some relationship with your spouse after the divorce, you haven't gone into the deep depths of all of your gripes about your marriage. You've gotten to a point where you can really resolve it and move forward. And I think that makes for a positive after divorce relationship. That's not always possible, but in contested cases, I feel like it is. And you don't ever have to step in a courtroom, which for a lot of people is a very significant factor in coming up with their own resolution outside of court. Mm-hmm. What about you? What do you think are the greatest benefits?
I mean, I agree with all of that, and the cost being one of the biggest factors there. I can go to the cons. I don't know. I think there's more pros than cons to getting having an uncontested divorce. I just think it's so rare. It is very rare. You're in the minority if you're able to do a really successful uncontested divorce. You just usually are. I guess one of the cons that I see is that actually what ended up happening was the parties did an uncontested divorce, and one of the parties got taken advantage of in that agreement they made, because they sat at that kitchen table and took the agreement from the other spouse and trusted them and thought, sure, this must be a good agreement. Like, they're not going to try to screw me. And then they went to the cheapest lawyer they could find, and they had documents drafted that were just very half-ass, if you will. And these people will come back to us years later because somebody's in contempt, meaning, they're violating this provision of our agreement. They're not paying me this timely. They're doing this with the kids. They're not following the parenting plan properly. And when we take a look at these documents that had been drafted, they just weren't drafted well. Basically, these documents, they set up the parties for future litigation because there's loopholes. They didn't go to somebody that paid enough attention to detail. So that would kind of be my warning, is just be careful. Meet with a lawyer before you decide if you're going to do an uncontested divorce. Interview attorneys, make sure you have the right fit. And remember, even though the agreement itself can be streamlined, the process can be streamlined. The drafting is so important, and you need a family law attorney that's going to be very careful, make sure all the commas are in the right places. There's no loopholes that we've left that would create future litigation that you have to come back one day. That would be the biggest kind of con to me that I see people sucked into, is let's go wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, I'm done with my divorce. Okay, perfect. Well, then you really are opening yourself up to risk later to come back and spend a lot of money to have somebody fix it because somebody keeps violating the crappy agreement.
And that's presuming it can be fixed.
Correct.
Because once you enter into an agreement and you've been living by it, there are a lot of provisions that just simply cannot be changed after the fact. So I agree.
That's expensive to try to do that.
It is. Even if you can do it successfully, which we have, but it's not easy. And, the other thing I would say, and this is kind of jumping back to a question you asked me earlier, is, what are the best kind of cases for uncontested? And something you just said led me to this. Cases that are not necessarily lending themselves to uncontested are where two people don't have equal access to information and your finances. And that's the example, I think, that ends up playing out the way that you just described, where you sit at the kitchen table, you make this agreement, you're trusting the other person, and you may not have all the information that you need to really make an informed decision. So, when I see a client come in and they say, I want an uncontested divorce, this is what we've agreed on, I support that. I'm not going to try to talk somebody out of it, but I am going to walk them through. I'm going to ask the questions and make sure for their protection that they've considered the risks or all the aspects of it, because people, you're right. We do this every day, just so you know.
Attorneys choke on their coffee too.
No, don't. Forget it.
Leave it in. We're human, okay? We can't be perfect all the time.
Anyway, the point is, and I think that we've covered this in various ways, is definitely talk to an attorney. And if they're doing their job for you, they're definitely asking you the questions that need to be asked ahead of time so that you don't learn a hard lesson after the fact.
Yeah. So that's your primer on uncontested divorces. And we are going to cover contested divorces in another episode. Anything else from you, Andee?
Not from me.
Me either. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.